to seated for the introduction. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. And I was just going to say that Larry was back by popular demand because his talk that he gave last month about ticks was very popular, very well received. And that recording is on the Highfield Hall and Gardens website if anybody wants to check it out later. Lots of good information there. Yeah. And so Larry Dapsis is an entomologist since age 5. And I love reading that because I know so many scientists who began their passion for science at a very young age. And I just love reading that. He has his BS in environmental science and biology from Pittsburgh State University and his MS in entomology from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. He has 36 years of professional pest management experience, including vegetables, cranberries, and household insects. And he joined the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension in 2011 as the Deer Tick Project Coordinator and Entomologist. And he's a member of the Barnstable County Task Force on Lyme and other tick-borne diseases. So we look forward to learning all about pollinators tonight with Larry Dapsis. Thank you.
All right, let me share my screen and see if I can pull up my deck. Here we are. Can you see my opening slide?
Yes.
All right, very good. You can hear me okay?
Perfect.
All right, we're off and running.
Yes.
Well, welcome. Nice way to spend a beautiful spring evening. Nice to see the sun again, but we are caught up on our water deficit that we were running. So I'm very happy to be here tonight and share with you insights on a subject that is near and dear to my heart. I mean, I'm a pest management specialist, but I have a strong interest in pollination ecology. Yeah, entomologist since age 5. And so just as an introduction, when I was a kid, yeah, I spent most of my time outdoors. I mean, I was, in the woods, and I was around swamps and in the meadows, and I would observe insects, collect them, but not just bugs. I mean, interesting looking rocks or plants. My bedroom looked like a science museum. At times. And one summer I started seeing these things showing up, and I had no idea what they were, but I thought they looked pretty cool. So I would break them off the branches, take them home, toss them in my bureau, and forget about them. Well, one day I was coming home from school, and I think I was 7 years old at the time, and my mom was standing on the front porch waiting. And when I got within earshot, I heard, "Lawrence Joseph Dapsis, get your butt in this house right now." And when you hear all 3 of your proper names in the same sentence, you know what that means. It's a senior staff meeting you've been invited to. And so my mom escorted me to my room, and what I had collected were praying mantis egg cases. And they hatched out all at the same time. And I'm looking at my room, and there are hundreds of these little baby mantids all over my bureau, all over my bed, on the walls, on the curtains. And it was the coolest thing I had ever seen. And I think that had some influence on my career decisions in the future. But my euphoria was short-lived, because my mom then took out the vacuum cleaner and solved what she perceived to be a problem. So, and it's not the last thing I ever let loose in the house either. So I had a very tolerant mother. So if we look at the world of plants and pollination, 90% of all plant species require an agent to pollinate them. So there are some plants that do it, reproduce in other ways, but 90% of plants, they require some agent to solve this biological, I don't want to call it a problem, but a process. And so the process is that you want to get pollen grains from the anthers, which are the boy part of the plant, and you need to transfer them to the stigma, which is on the female part of the plant. And then the pollen grains germinate, they go down, and then they result in fruit or seed or something. And there are various agents that accomplish this. Yeah, sure. If you look at various insects, butterflies, frequent visitors to flowers, yeah, they do to a certain extent, they do pollinate plants. There's a wide variety of beetles that are closely associated with blooming plants. And they are also, one of the agents that participate in this process. This is not a yellow jacket. This is actually a hoverfly, and it's a pretty large group, and they spend a lot of time at flowers, and they're a pollinator as well. And then if we look at creatures that don't look like much, but this is a little midge fly, very, very tiny, and it is the exclusive pollinator of this flower. And this is something that's a very inefficient process. Mechanically, it's almost a miracle that it works. That flower is very hard to get into and find the pollen. And those flowers are only open for 24 to 48 hours. Those little midge flies, they're lousy flyers, little puff of air, they're off course, and they can hardly gather a pollen load that's worthwhile. But they do, and they successfully get to other trees with these blooms, and they're the exclusive pollinator. And the reason this is important, this little midge fly, is because it is the exclusive pollinator of cacao trees. So without that little midge fly, no chocolate. And who can live in a world without chocolate? I think that would be devastating. But bees, with their big hairy bodies that pollen grains stick beautifully to, they are the perfect agent for this process. And they've refined this through millions of years of coevolution with plants. So pollinators like bees and plants, they came along together. But I would be remiss in not calling out another group of pollinators that are actually quite important. We look to bats. There's a number of species of bats that are very important in the pollination process. And so what we have here is an agave plant. And agave plants are pollinated exclusively by bats. And agave plants are very important because this is the plant from which we get tequila, okay? So the next time you have a margarita, you hoist a toast to that Mexican long-nosed bat, okay? They are worth their weight in gold. So keeping honeybees is something that we as people have been doing for 9,000 years. Beekeeping started out in North Africa, in Egypt, and you can see a lot of hieroglyphics that show this process, and pharaohs were entombed with vats of honey, and so this is something that's very popular today as a hobby. I think it's one of those aspects of sustainability. People feel a connection with the earth, and beekeepers, hobby beekeepers, they just look for opportunities to celebrate this all the time. So it's a widely popular hobby as it is, but beekeeping has its problems, and we'll look at some of those in greater detail. Now, if we look at bees and people from a vision standpoint, bees and people, we see the world in very, very different ways. Our vision kicks in at the red part of the spectrum and goes out to violet, okay? But bees, they don't see red. Their vision doesn't kick in until the orange yellow part of the spectrum, but it goes beyond violet into the ultraviolet. And during the day, we are awash in ultraviolet light. We just don't perceive it. We perceive some of its effects, sunburn, namely, um, but plants have used this characteristic of bee vision to its advantage to facilitate this process of pollination. So if we look at these daylilies, the picture up top, that's how we see a daylily. But that bottom picture, the daylilies have evolved to reflect that ultraviolet light back at varying densities. So the darker and darker part of the blossom, that is a higher saturation of reflectance of ultraviolet light. So what this is telling the bee and actually teaching the bee is that you go to the darker and darker parts of that flower. That's where the pollen and nectar reward is. Okay, these are in botany, we call these nectar guides. And nectar guides are prevalent throughout the plant world. So flowers have been talking to bees for millions of years. All right, so if we look at honeybee biology, all right, who lives there? All right, on the left, each colony, they have one queen, okay, and her job is just to reproduce. She just lays eggs. Most of the colony are worker bees. Those are the daughters of the queen bee, and an average colony might have 30 or 40,000 workers, and they do everything within the hive. I mean, they literally do it all. And then during the summer months, the queen, she'll produce a small number of drone bees. Those are the males. And during the day, they go out and they aggregate in swarms and they mate with virgin queens and come back. And in the fall, what happens is the worker bees will kick those drones outside to starve or freeze to death. So who wants a bunch of guys hanging around all winter, eating honey and not doing any housework? All right. So the honeybee society proceeds with a quiet efficiency. Okay. So there's a strong message here. All right. Bees talk to each other mostly through chemical mediated behavior. They produce a lot of chemicals called pheromones. And here's a queen bee. She's the one with the blue dot on her back. And she's producing a mandibular pheromone. So she's distributing that to her daughters from her mouth parts, glands in her mouth parts. And they in turn are distributing that to their sisters throughout the hive. And this is a very powerful pheromone. This is the pheromone. This chemical binds that society together. It is very, very powerful. And that mandibular pheromone is telling the hive a couple different things. It's telling them, mom is home, mom is very healthy, and mom is laying about 1,000 eggs a day. All right. So this mandibular pheromone has been synthesized to support research initiatives on, bee biology. But it's also been able to be incorporated into controlled release dispensers that are available to the public. And this is the agent that supports a very popular contest at county fairs, the bee beard contest. You strap one of those dispensers to your chin or part of your body, and the idea is who can come up with the most ornate arrangement of bees on their body part. I think this one won. That is a perfect bee beard. But this is not as risky or dangerous as it looks. I will tell you, this is a rigged game, all right? What they do before they release the bees, they let the bees drink as much sugar water as they can imbibe. And this has the effect of like a person having a really big Thanksgiving dinner. After that dinner, you just want to settle in on the couch, chill, watch some football or something. You're not in the mood to be aggressive. So these bees are completely docile. Well, here's a person that spent considerable time um, with that dispenser, and he constructed a bee suit. Okay, very patient person, and that guy is standing on a scale, and that bee suit weighed in at 57 pounds. And if you do the arithmetic, what's the average weight of a honeybee? That works out to be almost 250,000 bees that was on this guy. So what they do at the end of this, they just take spatulas and scrape those bees down into a bucket, put them back in the hive, and everybody's fine. All right, honeybee adults, they live about a month, and so they may die out in the field, but they also might die in the hive. And if they die maybe from a disease, that poses a risk to the overall health of the hive. So what's evolved over time is once a bee dies, they produce a funeral pheromone. And so what that does, it sends a signal to the surrounding workers, and they'll sense that pheromone and say, hey, Agnes is gone to meet her maker. And so what they do is pick Agnes up, carry her out to the front door, and toss her out, where she's basically food for a scavenger like this yellow jacket here. And when they discovered this pheromone and were trying to demonstrate, how this works, what what they did was they painted living honeybees with the funeral pheromone. They would go in the hive. Her sisters would pick her up and take her out to the front door and toss her out over and over and over. So entomologists, as a rule, we have kind of a twisted sense of humor going there. All right, bees, they change their jobs as they get older. When adult bees first emerge, their job is to clean the hive, all right? And yeah, it's pretty unfair. I mean, my job is to clean the hive, and I didn't make this mess, so it's like an unfair. And as they get older, then they become nurse bees and feed the kids. A little bit older, they're building honeycomb, they're capping brood. And just before they become forager bees that leave the hive and go out and get the groceries, they are guard bees. They are stationed at the entrance to the hive, because things like yellow jackets will come in and visit hives routinely. And what they're doing is gauging whether the hive is strong or if it's weak. Maybe it's weak from a disease or whatnot. And if a yellow jacket perceives that the hive is game, they go back and recruit their sisters. They come in and rob the hive of all the honey and the larvae and bring it back home to feed to their kids. So these guard bees, they're looking for these threats. And if something like a yellow jacket gets a little too close for comfort, the guard bee will attack it, but she will immediately release an alarm pheromone. And when other guard bees in the area detect this alarm pheromone, they are recruited to join the fight. So it's like a gang attack. So this is how honeybees defend themselves. Well, this alarm pheromone, and I'm not sure how this research pathway went, but it's been synthesized and it's being used by farmers in Africa as a repellent. Well, what the heck could this alarm pheromone be repelling? It repels elephants, all right, which can do a lot of damage in a cornfield overnight. As it turns out, elephants have very thin skin around their eyes, and they're very sensitive to bee stings. They don't like that at all. So they get a little whiff of that alarm pheromone and they are in the next county. All right, some of the problems going on with honeybees, and yeah, they're under siege by a number of things, but there was a condition that showed up in the mid 2000s, colony collapse disorder. Beekeepers would go into a hive and they would find a healthy queen, healthy brood, but almost a complete absence of workers. It's like they went out and forgot to come home. And so it was identified as like, okay, there's something big going on here. And it led to a lot of research to figure out, okay, what's happening. Colony collapse disorder was first described in 2006, but this has been expanded to honeybee decline overall. So CCD is just a component of the overall problems that honeybees are experiencing. This is a high stakes poker. Yeah, $20 billion in vegetable and fruit crops. Yeah, 90 crops require an insect pollinator like a bee. So if you think about this as a dinner table, 2/3 of the food that we consume is honeybee pollen or bee pollinated. And just before 2006, there was a new class of insecticides that were coming into the market, neonicotinoid or neonics for short. And one of the things we know about neonics is that they are highly toxic to bees. And so people were putting two and two together, wondering, okay, are these neonics, are they the smoking gun in this problem? Should they be regulated more tightly? Should they be banned? And there were some countries that did just that. So 2006, that vertical dash line is where CCD was identified formally. But the inventory of bees remains, steady at about 2.5 million hives in the country. And that's really through the fact that beekeepers have been forced to requeen their hives very frequently. So to maintain this inventory, it's been very costly to the beekeepers. And so this resulted in some major, reviews of neonics and trying to figure out, okay, are they the culprit here and what should we be doing about them? Well, neonics are a different class of insecticides altogether. They're systemic, meaning that if you drench the root system of the plant, those neonics go through the vascular tissue of the plant up to the foliage and the shoot apex. If you apply it to the foliage, same thing, it gets redistributed throughout the plant. And the significance of the shoot apex is that these things will get into nectar and pollen of the plant. And people look at that that's a red flag. And so they are the dominant class of insecticides in agriculture right now. 27% of all insecticides applied are neonicotinoids. And but it's not just agriculture. You go into a garden center, yeah, they're widely available to the general public. So if you go into a garden center and you see products that say annual treatment or systemic, those are neonics. Imidacloprid here, that's one of the most prevalent active ingredients in this class of products. So in my dealings with the general public, I try and persuade people to move away from this class of products because I'm not trying to be arrogant in this regard, but people by and large are not trained in the safe application of pesticides. Okay, so you can abuse these products and impact things in a way, and you wouldn't even think you were doing that. So for every pest situation I encounter with people on the Cape, there are alternatives to these products that I push people towards. And there's local actions that are taking place. There are groups that are actively looking at these things and trying to educate the public about the dangers and threats of these type of products. And yeah, on a local level, um, about 5 years ago, Hyannis Country Gardens, they just took them off the shelf completely. And there are box stores that are following suit. So the supply chain is kicking in. So like Home Depot and Target, they will not buy bedding plants from suppliers that are using neonics. So they have to certify that they are neonic free product. But these are muddy waters, okay? Because for a number of reasons, neonics, they don't totally fit the colony collapse picture, okay? Um, One of the things that's interesting is that it was demonstrated that the causal agent from CCD, if you irradiate hive equipment, that that causal agent, that it's removed, it takes that away. So it strongly suggests that a pathogen is probably involved, likely a virus or something. Australia presents a very interesting point of view. Australia, they are huge users of neonics in their agricultural systems. And in Australia, they don't have a single case of CCD. So what's the difference between down under and North America or Europe for that matter? Well, down in Australia, they do not have a significant parasite, Varroa mite. And that seems to be an important factor here. Nutrition has been looked at as being a factor. Um, if bees have access to a more diverse forage opportunities, a wider variety of plants, those hives are healthier than beehives that are basically confined to one or two sources of nectar and pollen. Travel stress. Yeah, the migratory bee industry is huge. Hives get jostled and moved around the country, and that takes a toll. If you look at the migratory bee industry, it starts in January, and with the success of marketing almond-based products, acreage in California has grown to be it's grown from 300,000 acres to almost 1 million acres of almonds. And when they come into bloom, yeah, half the bees in the country are shipped into California for that window of pollination. And that's just the start of the migratory bee season, because after California almonds, they go into the Pacific Northwest where they're pollinating tree fruits like apples and pears, and small fruits like blueberry and cranberry. Um, North Dakota, they have about 600 plus thousand acres of sunflowers. Yeah, they require pollinators to be brought in. The upper central Midwest, Wisconsin and Michigan, yeah, tree fruits and small fruits like cranberry and apple and blueberries. And then the Northeast. So once that season is done, then the bees go down to, warmer places like Florida or Texas to kind of revive and regroup and get rebuilt. So those girls, they go through a lot over the course of this pollinator season, and that takes its toll. Genetic diversity. Yeah, we have created genetic bottlenecks, and so our stock has a very narrow genetic basis, and that's because we, through regulations, have limited the importation of stock for bee breeding, and that's created kind of a sitting on the edge. So if this narrow genetic stock is susceptible to something new that shows up, yeah, we're in a big hurt. And yeah, there's a variety of diseases and parasites. Varroa mite in Massachusetts in particular, big problem. These things are like little ticks, and they don't feed on the blood of the bee, but they feed on the fat body of the bee, and they can really weaken a hive. So if a beekeeper's not on their management game for this particular pest, yeah, this weakens hives a lot, makes it very susceptible to winter kill and things like that. All right, so with that, so the honeybee situation, we can't help that at a local level, realistically. This has to be played out at a much higher level and a broader level across, federal and state agencies. So it needs some very large, very focused work. Well, in transition, before we go into, wild pollinators, um, some of you may have seen this headline a little over a year ago. Murder hornets were captured in Washington state and also in British Columbia. And it created a big havoc. And as soon as that headline hit, I had people calling me on the Cape that they were seeing murder hornets, and in actual effect, they were looking at bald-faced hornets. But these things are big, they're aggressive, but they're from Southeast Asia. So before the name murder hornet was assigned, when they were called the tiger face hornet or the sheep face hornet, nobody really paid attention to it. Although in Tibet, they are known as the yak killer, okay? So when they were found in Japan, that's where the name murder hornet was assigned. And so the significance of these predators is that a small number of murder hornets can go into a hive and they will decapitate every single worker in the hive. And then after that murder is done, they go to the crime scene, they take all the bodies and bring them back and feed them to their kids. So this is a creature that's pretty formidable looking. Yeah, fairly sizable. It's got a stinger that's about a 1/4 inch long. It could put a dent on you. Ecologically, though, they are restricted to temperate rainforest. So Western Washington and Western British Columbia, pretty much it's going to be the confining space for them. But as they were doing research on this, they found that these girls can cruise along at about 25 miles an hour, and they can cover 60 miles in a day. So their potential for dispersal is huge. And so researchers were interested in physiologically what kind of machinery is being used to allow this type of coverage. And they discovered that these Asian hornets, they have a unique blend of amino acids to feed this machine. And when that research was published, now that became a marketing opportunity. And there are people in the food industry that jump on these sorts of things. And shortly after this was published, yeah, Hornet juice came on the market. Basically, a marketing initiative directed at men that just felt like they needed things for energy and endurance and things like that. So it's pretty much a joke, but it's here and it's on the market. All right, let's talk about wild pollinators for a bit. Principally, I want to talk about bumblebees. This is actually my favorite insect on the planet, and I've got a million choices, literally. Now, bumblebee nests, they're annual nests. So they start early in the season, and at the end of the summer, they're gone. So the new queens that are produced at the end of the summer, they basically just go into the woods and crawl under leaf litter, and they're covered by snow, and they just hibernate. They're just spend the winter sleeping. But they emerge very early in the spring, about the time the first plants are coming into bloom. And they'll form nests in a variety of locations. You can find them in bunches of grass. You can find them, they will take over abandoned rodent burrows, but they'll even form nests in things like birdhouses. So here's the queen here, and what she's doing is she's building these little capsules that are basically constructed of pollen and wax. And those little things in the middle, those are the grubs. And so what she does is that builds these things, and during the cold weather, she'll incubate these things. And what she'll do is lay over them, and she can vibrate her wing muscles, and that creates heat. They can go very quickly from ambient temperature up to about 100 degrees. Um, Bumblebees have twice the metabolic rate of a hummingbird. They are fuel burners. And so with that warmth, she incubates them, they hatch, and they develop more quickly. And what she also does, she makes these little, what we call honey pots. So that contains pollen and nectar for the developing larvae as they develop into the next generation of workers. Now, Henry Franklin, he was the entomologist at the UMass Cranberry Experiment Station in East Wareham, and he was there for 50 years. And he worked out all the management problems for the pests that the cranberry growers were struggling with. And when I was in the cranberry industry and working on problems, I often wanted to have a seance with Dr. Franklin to kind of help me along. But his writings were just perfect and he was my invisible mentor. But not only was he a pest management extraordinaire specialist, he had a big interest in bumblebees, because bumblebees are the perfect, they co-evolve with ericaceous plants like cranberry and blueberry. They are the perfect pollinator for these type of crops. And so if you look at a honeybee, that's a cranberry blossom, that little thing that looks so pointing down. It originally was called craneberry because the blossom looked like the neck of a crane. And so a honeybee, they work the blossom. They're kind of clumsy at it, but and they extract enough pollen to get the job done. So cranberry growers will rent beehives and use about two per acre to get the job done. But bumblebees, they love to see bumblebees. And when a bumblebee visits the blossom, they know exactly how to work this blossom. That bumblebee worker, she will grab that blossom, vibrate her wing muscles. That creates an ultrasonic wave, and the pollen just pours out of those anthers in a big batch. And I had a person who was studying this, part of my group, and he was collecting blossoms as he watched honeybees versus bumblebees. And when he collected a blossom that a honeybee visited, he'd put it under the microscope and he'd see about 10 grains of pollen on the stigma of the flower, just enough to pollinate it and get a berry. When a bumblebee visited it and he looked at it under the microscope, it looked like a snow cone. Okay, they are the perfect agent for this job. And so people for many years were trying to figure out, can we domesticate bumblebees like we did honeybees? And people came up with various inventions, nesting boxes, things to simulate the environment that they would create a nest in. And bumblebees, great pollinators, but very stubborn. They're not akin to domestication. Well, there's a company in Holland that solved this not too many years ago, and they now do this, and they sell these quads. I mean, they're four bumblebee hives on a pallet, and they sell them into various industries. And I met a person from Copert at one of my professional meetings, and I was just asking some casual questions about how you do this, and boy, I got nothing. So no insight at all. It's proprietary technology. But they sell these, they use them in glass house crops quite a bit. They calculated that an individual bumblebee equates to $5 of greenhouse tomatoes. And they're also being used, on a larger scale in outdoor crops, high value crops like strawberries, because these quads, they're kind of pricey. They're like $300 a pop for an individual box. My best friend in graduate school is Dr. Ann Averill, and she's the new Henry Franklin at the Cranberry Experiment Station. And she's kind of carried on with the tradition of looking at wild pollinators like bumblebees. And she's been doing surveillance for a while. And what she has seen over the last 30 years is that there's been a reduction in the number of species of bumblebees that are out there. And 30 years, that's not a long time. And not only do we have fewer species out there, but now if you look, 2/3 of the bumblebees just about are Bombus impatiens. So the problem here is if something comes along that Bombus impatiens is very susceptible to, that's not a good situation. So if we look at the overall landscape, yeah, in the last 100 years, we have lost 50% of our bumblebee species in Massachusetts. All right. So it's been a steady decline in what's going on. And the research shows it's, the typical multiple smoking guns, parasites, pesticides, and lack of flowers. We've really destroyed a lot of habitat and opportunities for these girls to make a living. So when I drive around the Cape and I see perfectly lush green manicured lawns, I'm very disappointed. That's a lost opportunity. And I know the chemical inputs that are required to have that end product result. In my yard, if it's green, grows, and ideally blooms, it's welcome. All right. And I think we need more of that. So what we can do, we can restore habitat and plant forage. And so it's not a simple matter of just planting flowers that we find pretty. You have to think about this as season-long forage. So you want plants that are coming into bloom in the early spring, late spring, midsummer, late summer, even into the fall. So you want to cover that whole foraging window. And there are ways to do that. There's lots of outreach materials that are available. And you have to think long term. Think about, going into the future. I couldn't resist not using this. I just thought this was a gorgeous picture. This woman had a vision and it continues today. I mean, that is just one heck of a plant. But there's some creativity that's being involved now. Over in Holland, yeah, every bus stop has basically a rooftop garden to support urban pollinator populations. Here's an idea that came to me from Maine. And yeah, I mean, if you're going to have a junk car on your lawn, you make it pretty and make it pollinator friendly and functional. All right. And the Xerces Society, they are a great resource for information on the things that you want to plant, but also there are local resources too. Yeah, our garden centers like Agway, they know what you should be looking for. Hyannis Country Garden, same thing. They do outreach. They provide lists of native plants that are perfect for this opportunity. And finally, this is Bernd Heinrich. He's a naturalist that lives in Vermont. He's written on a variety of subjects. He's a very good writer and he's a very good naturalist. And he wrote a book. He wrote my favorite bug book, Bumblebee Economics. If you want to do a deep dive into this subject, this book it's a treasure trove of information about bumblebees and their life cycle and just a lot of good information. I refer to this book continuously. And with that, I will stop my screen share and we can entertain any questions that you may have.
Thank you. That was amazing.
Cool stuff, huh?
Sorry, we had some, thankfully Steve had her computer ready, but we had a little issue here at Highfield. So I'm just going to, if everybody wants to change to gallery view so everybody can see one another questions. Yeah, I mean, Larry, that was amazing. So it is concerning that.
Well, you did put a
50%.
lot of pressure on me to nail this.
I know, but it is concerning at the loss, the percentage of loss. Can we restore the habitat and can we get them to come back to their original numbers, bees?
For wild pollinators?
Yeah,
I think you can set this up as a conservation project. I mean, people's yards, I mean, we have a lot of, you know, suburban neighborhoods that if you think about people working together collectively to leave habitat open, let, you know, wildflowers, you know, cultivate and plant, forage. I think you can, but I think it's a community-wide effort. But I think individual efforts are good, but I think a community-wide approach is the solution.
yeah, I did like that urban garden. I thought that was pretty inventive.
Oh, the bus stops with the,
Yes.
yeah, I thought that was excellent. When I saw that, I said, okay, those people in Holland, they think out of the box.
I have a question about self-pollination. I read somewhere once that some plants, if there weren't enough pollinators around, a lot of plants can self-pollinate, but that the fruit that's produced is much less optimal than fruit produced by real pollination.
Yeah, I mean, cross-pollination seems to be better for the plant biologically in terms of productivity. And I think that's been demonstrated in a number of systems. But a number of ecologists, and I believe this, that if we lose our bees, we're done. We're done.
I have a question. How good are the bee hotels that they're talking about these days?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that point, because people think they're doing something good by putting out bee hotels. What you're doing is setting out a reservoir for disease. They are a bad idea. And so it's people shouldn't be doing that. It's like a feel-good exercise, but it's not good for the health of bees overall.
Okay, thank you.
We also had, we'd advertised that you were going to talk about murder hornets. Do you have a 1-minute talk about murder hornets for us?
That was about 20 slides ago.
Oh, I missed it. Oh, was that one? I'm
That was
sorry.
fine.
I went up to get my computer. I
That-
apologize.
Yeah, that was when we were having a little technical difficulty here.
Do you want me to start the presentation
No,
over?
Luckily, we taped the program.
Okay. The murder hornets, we covered it, but hornet juice is the product that you want to focus on for this one. It's hysterical.
Okay. So when you say we're done, what does that mean? Like no more pollination if the bees are no longer part of our ecosystem?
Most of our foods won't be produced.
Our foods.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll starve. I mean,
Right.
we can eat wheat products and corn products for a long time, but that's not a sustainable diet.
Correct, yeah. I was curious, I was out in Montana recently and there were beehives everywhere. But I was trying to determine what crops. I mean, there's a lot of cows out there, but not a lot of crops. So I was curious why everybody seemed to have a beehive on their farm.
Not sure. They may have had fruit crops on the property like apples and things like that
Yeah.
you didn't see. So
Perhaps.
they're not pollinating cattle, that's for sure.
I know. Okay, yeah, that's a little alarming. So as an entity, as a small little Highfield Hall and Gardens, I know that we do.
They're hurting. They
Yeah.
need help. They need a lot of help.
So we are busy with our pollinator garden right now. We've always had one, but to a small degree, and our landscape director is increasing that quite a bit this year and beyond. So
Mhm.
if everybody takes that posture, we should be okay.
Yeah, it will improve things. I mean, it's in a tight spot right now. We're getting by. I mean, the honeybees, it's just because people are working so hard to requeen hives and keep a base supply available. But for wild pollinators, we've got to do a lot more on a larger scale. That's for sure.
Right. I always toyed with wanting to put a beehive here at Highfield, but I think we're gonna have to put that on the back burner for now. Maybe at my house.
It's a commitment. It's not
Yes.
having a hive and go collect honey in the fall.
I know.
It's something, varroa mite alone, you have to really be on top of those type of problems.
Right.
And not all beekeepers are as diligent as they should be. Okay.
Right.
So we see on the Cape, I just did a tick workshop for the Barnstable County Beekeepers Association, and I was talking with the club association president just before the meeting, and I asked her what was the hive loss from last winter, and she said a lot of her members were reporting 60% hive loss.
Oof.
Brutal.
Yeah, it's tough. And was that from disease, do you think, or
A variety of things.
a variety?
It's varroa mite and some of these strains of bees aren't adapted to really, winter in our climate. So John Portnoy out in, I think he's in Wellfleet, and he's been doing queen bee rearing to select for queens that are more adapted to Cape Cod climate.
Well, despite the evidence that the neonicotinoids are not necessarily all the problem, we still have to fight both on. We need to keep the habitat, but we also should be using less chemicals too, right? Is it at least a two-pronged effort?
It is. You need farmers to subscribe to integrated pest management tactics, use the best intervention for the situation. And if you can guide away from neonics, I think that's a positive. But if you're not using neonics, you're using synthetic pyrethroids that are also very, very toxic to bees. I mean, if I just use cranberry farmers as a proxy, it's a highly educated industry in terms of using agricultural chemicals correctly. The industry is extremely mindful, does a lot of continuous education. I was part of that for many, many years when I was at Ocean Spray. So the cranberry growers, they get it. They get it, especially since they're farming in a wetland, and they get it even more.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of frightening, actually, that we've reached this point. And
Well,
then nothing's been done to this point.
That's the importance of education and getting the message out that people understand what's going on. Because I think a lot of people are oblivious to the situation with pollinators and what's happening.
Right.
How critical it is.
These type of discussions are very beneficial because if it's recorded and people are rewatching it and then talking about it, ideally with people at a local level and even a state level, then we see action.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to promote on our weekly messaging, to watch and the value of this discussion, and to help, push that narrative forward, because it's a very important one.
It is.
Obviously.
When I first developed this workshop, it was at the prodding of, there were garden groups that said, Larry, can you talk about bees? And I said, okay, I don't have anything prepared, but I went to my buddy Ann Averill and got some information from her, and then I did a lot of research as I was putting this together. And I had an interest in bees for many years, but then I took a deep dive as I was preparing this discussion.
Oh, well, it was very, very good. I feel like we've sort of commandeered the conversation, but Scott, Mary Beth, does any other questions? Does anybody else have any comments? Teresa Jones, I'm putting you all on the spot, but I want, if you have any questions, please let us know.
I would like to ask, in the second slide in the upper left corner, there was a animal, and I don't know what kind of animal it was, but it looked like a biplane. It had 4 wings. Could you identify what that was?
I'm not sure which slide you're referring to.
In your slideshow, I think it was the second one. You showed different beetles. One was a striped red beetle.
I showed various pollinators. So the upper left was a butterfly, the center one was a longhorn beetle, the right-hand one was a hoverfly, and then we get into that little chocolate midgefly discussion.
Okay. What was the top left one?
It was a butterfly.
Okay.
Was there a picture of a dragonfly at one point?
Oh, yeah, the second slide. Yeah, when I was just showing my activities as a youth, bug observing, that was a dragonfly, a June bug, and a red striped leafhopper, and then the praying mantis egg case.
Right. Love that egg case story. That was pretty entertaining.
Oh, that's as Cetus was saying, that when you realize at a young age that you're destined to be a scientist, I mean, experiences like that, yeah, I'm going to be a scientist. I knew at a very early age that was going to be my trade.
Awesome. Wonderful.
Because I'm 5'7", because I was never going to make it as a professional basketball player.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask one more question about the bee hotels. What makes them so disease producing?
They're just a reservoir for pathogens, so that because people don't clean them out, so the bees that inhabit those little tubes, bees pick up viruses from flowers. So plants are not very clean in terms of pathogens. So bees pick up viruses and transfer them to other flowers. They're picked up by other bees. There's research Ann was doing on sackbrood virus of bumblebees, and she showed that the longer honeybees were associated in an area, the higher the percentage of infection of sackbrood virus in the bumblebees, sackbrood virus. And so if you went out to a place that had no honeybees, feral honeybees, like National Seashore, you saw no sackbrood virus in the bumblebees out there. But if you went to cranberry bogs that had bees come in for a short period of time, you had a percentage of sackbrood virus in the bumblebees. Those bogs or areas that had honeybee hives year round, the bees in that area were almost 100% infected with sackbrood virus.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a complex ecosystem out there. There's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, it's 6:30 unless somebody else has another question for Larry Dapsis. We'll thank him for his time. Oh, Margaret is clapping, I believe.
Okay.
Thank
Do
you,
the way-
Larry.
do
This
the
was
wave.
really wonderful. And
Do the wave.
we will do our part and
Thank
try
you,
to push
Jennifer.
this forward for you.
Excellent, excellent. So what should we talk about next time?
Let's collaborate. Yes, I'd love for there to be a next time. Thank you so much.
Very, very good.
As usual,
You folks have a good evening and stay in touch.
we will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.